My name is Natalie Whittaker. I am 34 years old. On the morning of my wedding, my father stopped me at the entrance of the little church where I had grown up and said he would not take me down the aisle. My fiancé, Marcus Reed, was black, and my father said, in front of people who had known me since childhood, that Marcus was not our kind. Then he told me to go in by myself and think carefully about the shame I was bringing on the family. So I removed my hand from my father's sleeve and waited for the music to begin. When the doors opened, I did not walk alone. The man who offered me his arm was someone my father had not faced in 29 years. By the time that morning was over, Harold Whittaker would have to explain a name he had spent nearly 3 decades trying to bury. I never yelled. I did not have to. I should start with the Tuesday I drove home to break the news of the engagement to my parents. I was living in Peoria then, a little more than 90 minutes from the farm where I was raised. I had left that farm at 19 with a duffel bag, a partial scholarship, and the sort of stubbornness that looks like courage only after it works out. The rest of nursing school was paid for with overnight shifts in a long-term care center. Now I work in hospice. That job teaches you what people confess when there is no time left to make anything prettier. Very few people regret the truth they finally spoke. They regret the truth they sat on. They regret the apology they saved for later until later stopped existing. Marcus and I had been together for almost 5 years. He worked as a large animal vet, broad-shouldered and calm, a man who could settle a panicked bull with his voice, and then get misty during a commercial about lost dogs. On my fridge, there was an old photograph with faded edges. In it, a man held me on his hip near a young white oak tree by a gravel lane. I called him my uncle, but for most of my life, nobody in my house had been willing to say much more. Friends asked about that picture sometimes. Marcus asked, too. I always gave some thin answer and changed the subject. I had a memory of standing beneath that little oak, but the memory never fit the version of family history I had been handed. I thought telling my father about the wedding would be the difficult part. I was wrong. The road into Bellard County was the same as ever. Soybeans, corn, low ditches, barns faded by weather, and the grain elevator standing over the town like it had appointed itself mayor. The white Whittaker farmhouse sat at the end of the lane as if time had been forced to go around it. The back screen door still had the same spring. It opened with a rusty groan, then snapped shut with a crack that carried across the yard. As a child, I could tell who had entered the house by the sound of that door. My father, Harold Whittaker, was at the kitchen table listening to commodity prices on the radio. My mother, Linda Whittaker, was at the stove wearing the careful smile she used whenever she sensed a storm, but did not want to name the clouds. My brother, Grant Whittaker, was outside near the bins, which had become his natural habitat. That spring he had taken on another loan to expand the operation. A new bin, a truck scale, and 50 more acres he had wanted since he was old enough to say the word legacy without understanding what it cost. Across the section road, Walter Benson raised one hand from his porch. He had farmed beside us all my life. Before retirement, he had worked in the county records office, filing deeds, wills, easements, and all the dry little papers that decide who owns the ground everybody is willing to fight over. My mother wiped her hands on a towel and steered me back toward my truck before I had even taken off my jacket. "Please don't say anything that will set your father off," she whispered. I had not said a single thing yet. The next Sunday, I brought Marcus for dinner. I wanted my family to meet the man, not the rumor they were already building in their heads. My mother put out the plates with the silver rims, the ones that appeared only for Christmas, funerals, and appearances. My father shook Marcus's hand like a man inspecting a fence post he had already decided was crooked. Grant talked about weather, feed prices, and field drainage while managing not to look directly at Marcus for more than 3 seconds. We were halfway through pot roast when Grant's phone rang. One of his cows had collapsed out in the lot, badly bloated and fading fast. Marcus placed his napkin beside his plate. "Would you mind if I checked her?" he asked. A minute later, He was outside in his good shirt, sleeves rolled, hands steady. He found the problem, walked Grant through what had to be done, and saved the animal without once acting like a hero. When he returned carrying the smell of hay and barn dirt, he washed at the kitchen sink like he had belonged there for years. My mother looked at him as if relief had almost reached her face. My father watched in silence. Then he cut into his roast and said, without looking up, "Where is he from exactly?" The kitchen went still. I could hear the clock, the refrigerator, and that old screen door shivering in the wind. Later that same week, Walter Benson came onto my patient list. He was 82, failing from congestive heart disease, and wanted to die at home in the bedroom with the window facing the fields he had worked for almost 6 decades. The agency gave me the case because of my history with the family, and because I had a steady hand with people who had more history than breath left in them. Walter's mind had filing cabinets where other people had shelves. The first afternoon, while I changed his sheets, he watched me with pale, watery eyes. "You're Harold's daughter," he said. "You have Clara's face." Clara Whittaker was my grandmother. I told him I would take that as a compliment. He smiled, then the smile left him. "I remember that farm back when both boys had a place there," he said. I asked him to explain. He looked past me toward the fields glowing gold in the late light. "Your grandmother asked for something before she died," he said. "She never got it, and I helped make sure she didn't." I thought the medicine was pulling old regrets loose. It was not medicine. The wedding plans came together in the ordinary way, with tiny decisions that turn into large consequences. I wanted the ceremony at Willow Creek Chapel, the small white church off Highway 18 where I had been baptized, confirmed, and scolded into sitting still. The cemetery behind it held my grandmother beneath a stone that called her a beloved mother, which was true, though apparently not the whole truth. When my mother heard, the corners of her eyes tightened. "Keep it simple," she said. "Quiet, you know your father." I did know him, that was the problem. At the farm, Grant was busy making plans for the new bin and scale. The white oak near the lane stood exactly where he wanted equipment to pass. "That tree has to come down," he said one afternoon, as if the tree had filed a personal objection to progress. I said it was not as ancient as he kept pretending. "Somebody planted it," I told him. "I remember it being small." Grant shrugged. It was the shrug of a man choosing not to remember. That night in Peoria, I decided I would invite my father to escort me into the church. It was not because I expected generosity from him. It was because I wanted to offer him one clean chance to become the father I had once believed he was. I wanted to watch him choose with no excuse left. I called my cousin Sophie Whittaker, the way I always did when my own thoughts became too loud. Sophie and I grew up separated by a silence neither of us understood. We found each other as adults and held on hard. She knew the version of me who existed beneath the efficient nurse, the responsible daughter, the woman who made sure everyone else had what they needed. I told her the plan, the church, the dress, asking my father. She listened and then said the one thing only she was allowed to say. "Do you actually want him standing at the front of that room?" "He's my father," I said. "That is a fact," she said. "It is not an answer." She had me there and I allowed her to have it. We did not fight about it. We stayed on the line from our separate kitchens and let the quiet say what both of us already knew. When Marcus came home from the clinic, still in coveralls, he pressed a kiss into my hair and offered tea. I said yes. There is something rare about a man who meets dread by putting a kettle on instead of delivering a lecture. "You will choose what is right," he said. "Whatever that turns out to be." I thought I had time. I had 3 days. 3 evenings later at the farmhouse table with my parents, Grant, Marcus, and me sitting under the yellow kitchen light, I asked my father directly, "Dad, will you escort me down the aisle?" He chewed, swallowed, and set his fork down with a small click. Then his eyes went to Marcus instead of me. "I will not stand in that church and bless this." My mother's hands froze. Grant became suddenly interested in his glass of water. "He is a good man," I said. "You watched him save Grant's cow." Then my father said the words that changed the air in the house. "He is not our kind." The kitchen seemed to stop breathing. Finally, he looked at me. "If you insist on this, you do it without me. Walk in alone." Use the walk to consider the damage you're bringing to this family." Marcus did not move. He only found my hand beneath the table and held it, warm and steady. A strange calm settled over me, the kind that comes when the thing you dreaded finally steps into daylight and turns out to have a shape. "All right," I said. "Then I'll ask someone who will." At that moment, the screen door lifted on its old spring and cracked shut in the wind, as if the house wanted punctuation. Once Marcus and I passed the county line, my phone started vibrating in the cup holder and refused to quit. The family group chat, created for birthdays and harvest updates, had apparently found a nobler purpose: coordinated blame. My father's sister Evelyn Whittaker wrote that I was humiliating him on purpose. Grant said I was creating trouble that would not go back into the box and needed for once to consider everyone else. One cousin sent a single word: unbelievable. My mother said nothing in the group. In my family, silence can be louder than a slammed door. Then she texted me privately: "Please don't make this worse." By the time we reached Peoria, the messages had become a courtroom where nobody had sworn to tell the truth. One aunt asked if Marcus had put ideas into my head, as though I had never owned one before meeting him. Another relative wrote that my father had always provided for us and deserved respect. No one asked what he had said. No one asked why I had gone quiet. In the Whittaker family, the person who names the wound is usually accused of holding the knife. I did not reply. There is no victory in arguing with people who require you to play the villain. Silence forces them to sit with what they already typed, which is apparently cruel treatment in some households. Marcus drove with one hand steady on the wheel and the other resting on my knee. For nearly 30 miles, he let me be quiet. At a red light in Millbrook, while the phone still buzzed, I pulled up my contacts and moved past Mom, Dad, and Grant until I reached a name I had not called in months: Uncle Samuel. 3 days after that, I drove to Samuel Whittaker's place, 3 counties away, where the half of my family that had not made love conditional lived. Samuel was my father's older brother. He was 66, with my grandmother's soft gray eyes, and he ran a feed-in seed store many farmers in that county depended on each spring. His wife, Angela Whittaker, opened the door with flour dusting her fingers and pulled me so hard I could smell cinnamon and laundry soap. Their daughter Sophie had beaten me to the table, naturally. This was where we both came when the old family house broke something inside us. I did not ask Samuel for anything at first. I sat in that kitchen and allowed myself to be loved without footnotes. After a while, he poured coffee and looked at me over the rim of his mug. "Your grandmother hummed in a kitchen almost this size," he said. "Do you remember the song?" "I think I do," I said. "It feels buried under everything else." He nodded. "She hummed it the final time I saw her," he said. "Just before your father and I quit speaking, right before the whole thing closed around us." He set down his cup. "There are parts nobody told you, Natalie. The story I was raised on went like this. In 1997, when I was 5, my uncle Samuel married Angela. Angela was black. My grandmother Clara loved her immediately. My father did not. After that came dinners that ended early, holidays that developed sudden excuses, and one Christmas that seemed to vanish from the calendar. Then Samuel was gone from the farm, gone from the table, gone from the stories unless someone needed him as a warning. My father's version was simple. Samuel had chased a new life and abandoned the old one. The aunt said Samuel had broken his mother's heart and hastened her death. Nobody ever told the version from Samuel's side, because Samuel was never invited into the room where the story was being polished. My own memories were thin but stubborn. I remembered the white oak as a sapling tied to a stake. I remembered a tall man lifting me so I could see over a pasture fence. Then I remembered the lifting ending. The man disappeared, and my family taught me not to ask why. Only one phrase survived every retelling unchanged. My father used it like a latch, not our kind. That was the story I inherited. It was missing the part that mattered. Walter Benson weakened quickly after that. Some afternoons he could name the year, the weather, and every family who had owned land along our road. Other afternoons he drifted beyond reach until evening. On one of the clear days, while I checked his pulse, he closed his fingers around my wrist with surprising strength. Clara visited my office, he said. Before the end. Sick as she was, she drove to the courthouse and sat across from my desk and told me she wanted the home place divided equally between her sons. Equal shares. She repeated it. I asked what happened. His eyes filled and tears slipped down the sides of his face. It was not done, he said. Papers were signed afterward that should never have been accepted. I filed them anyway. I knew better, Natalie. But Harold Whittaker was hard to refuse, and in a small county, a coward with a clerk's badge can do plenty of damage. I told him he could rest, that we did not have to do this now. He shook his head as if rest had become irrelevant. I kept copies, he whispered. I kept them in case somebody finally came who might do right. He made me promise to come back Thursday. I'll put something in your hands, he said. That night, I drove back to Peoria with my grandmother's name beating in my head and a half-remembered hymn under it. I asked Samuel to escort me into the church on a Sunday afternoon while we sat on his back porch, Angela snapping green beans beside us and cicadas buzzing through the trees. I said it quickly, before fear could dress itself up as prudence. Will you be the one to give me away? He stayed quiet so long that even the cicadas seemed rude. Natalie, he said at last, if I come through those church doors, your father will see a ghost from 29 years ago, so will everyone else. Maybe they need to, I said. Maybe a ghost is just truth standing where people can finally look at it. That almost made him smile. So you would rather have a ghost at the wedding than your father? Angela did not look up from the bowl. She placed one hand on his arm. Samuel, she said, gentle but firm, the girl asked, don't make her beg. He looked at her, then across his fields. Something old shifted behind his eyes. Let me sit with it, he said. I knew then. People do not usually ask for time to refuse something that simple. They refuse. My mother found me alone in the parking lot at Willow Creek Chapel after a planning meeting. She had driven from the farm just to stand beside me on the gravel near my car. There is something I need to tell you, she said. And you cannot repeat it. I waited. In the fading light, she looked older than I had ever admitted, all 61 years of her suddenly visible. Your grandmother, she began. Clara, she wanted things handled a certain way. The land, her sons. My breath caught. What way, Mama? I asked it softly, the way I speak to patients when fear has trapped the answer in their throat. For one long second, I saw the truth rise behind my mother's teeth. Almost 40 years of it stood there, ready to fall between us. Then she closed her mouth. Some things are better left buried, she said. She got into her car and left me in the gravel with her tail lights shrinking down the road. I stood there a long time. For the first time, I understood something I had spent years avoiding. My mother had not been only cruel. She had been afraid for so many years that fear had learned to disguise itself. From the outside, it resembled quiet dinners and folded laundry, and a woman asking everyone else to keep peace because she had confused peace with the absence of noise. Grant came to my apartment, which he never did. He drove all the way into Peoria and stood in my doorway twisting his cap in both hands. I hear you've been seeing Samuel, he said. I have. He came inside but would not sit. He refused coffee. He stood in the middle of my living room as if preparing to deliver bad news at a wake. Natalie, I mortgaged everything this spring. The new bin, the scale, the leased acreage. Every dollar I have and plenty I don't have is tied to that farm. I know. If Samuel's name starts coming up, he said, lowering his voice, if people at the courthouse start asking why the title reads the way it reads, the bank will get nervous. Nervous banks can call things in. They can freeze funds. They can ruin us before a judge even looks at anything. I watched him. What exactly are you afraid they will find, Grant? He did not answer. He looked past me instead. Do not let him near the wedding, he said. If you put him in front of those people, this will be bigger than a ruined ceremony. The farm goes with it. Then he drove back through the dark. I stood in my living room after he left and noticed the most important thing he had not said. He had not said it was false. He had only said it would be expensive if it became known. Thursday came. Walter was propped up in bed. clearer than he had been in days. Some dying people brighten near the end, like a lamp flaring before the filament gives way. He told me to open the bureau's bottom drawer and look under the winter quilts. I found a manila folder so worn at the edges it felt soft. The first page was my grandmother's will, with a date, witnesses, and her signature. It left the home farm equally to both of her sons. Behind it was a 1997 quitclaim deed. Samuel's signature was there, shaky and cramped, giving away his half for almost nothing. The date was 19 days before Clara died, when she was too sick to stand at the sink and hum. "I recorded what I knew was wrong," Walter said. "Your father brought Samuel to my office grieving and ashamed. Harold told him it was what Clara wanted, that it would keep the peace, that signing was the honorable thing." He pressed his palm against the folder. "It was a lie. Clara's real wishes were sitting in my drawer while he said it." He looked exhausted, but his eyes held mine. "I want to leave this world clean if I can. Her wishes were recorded. They are still in the county books. They did not vanish. Somebody just has to ask the correct question." 3 nights later, Walter died. But the folder was already with me. The Friday evening rehearsal took place in the church hall. The wedding party sat in metal folding chairs while Pastor Daniel Morris walked us through the ceremony. My father's arrival surprised me only until I understood it. He had not come to support me. He had come to make sure his refusal had an audience. When Pastor Morris asked who would be escorting the bride, my father rose from his chair. "I have already made my position clear," he said, loud enough for people near the kitchen to hear. "I will not take part in this. Natalie should think very carefully about choosing outsiders over her own blood." Pastor Morris tried to move gently past it. My father was not finished. "If she wants to walk into that sanctuary carrying this decision," he said, "then she can walk alone. Alone and thinking about what she has done to her family." He crossed the hall, forced the side door open, and released it with enough force to shake the glass. Everyone sat inside that noise. My maid of honor took my hand. Marcus stood at the front, silent, watching me. He knew I did not need rescue. I needed someone to see what was happening and not look away. My father drove off believing the slammed door had ended the subject. It had not even begun. The next morning, Samuel and I drove to the county seat. The folder stretched flat across the back seat, like something alive that might wake if disturbed. Helen Brooks had a small law office above a hardware store, overlooking the courthouse square. She was in her early 50s, with silver at her temples and the calm of someone who has heard many people discover that paper can bleed. She listened without interrupting, put on her glasses, and worked through the pages. Clara's will, Samuel's quitclaim, Walter's note about the recording date. No gasp came from her, and neither did a promise of victory. "Good lawyers, I have learned, do not sell fireworks when you need a flashlight." She tapped the deed. "The date matters," she said. "A transfer signed while his mother was dying, when a valid will says something else, can be challenged, especially if the estate was never properly administered." She looked at Samuel, then at me. "Give me several days. I will get the recorded deed and review the probate file myself. Until I tell you what is here, neither of you discusses this with Harold, Grant, or anyone who shares gossip over a fence." Samuel nodded with the patience of someone who had already waited 29 years. Helen called us back the following Thursday. The probate file confirmed the skeleton of Walter's confession. Clara's signed and witnessed will, made years before her death, split the home place evenly. The quitclaim that shifted Samuel's half to Harold had been signed during Clara's final illness. No one had formally carried the will through probate, which Helen said was the loose thread. She chose her words carefully. She never promised a win. What she said was that a court could reopen the matter. She said the timing, the will left hanging, and the pressure placed on Samuel created a serious claim for undue influence. Helen also asked Samuel whether anyone had pressured him at the time. He sat with his hands folded and said my father had come to him after one of Clara's worst nights, when grief had made the whole world feel unsteady. Harold told him their mother wanted the farm kept clean and simple, which I understood immediately as the kind of language people use when they are about to do something dirty. but want the room to smell like soap. Samuel said he had signed because he was tired, ashamed, and desperate not to be the son everyone blamed for killing his mother with disappointment. Helen wrote that down without changing expression. Only the pen moved faster. Likely contestable, she said. Not guaranteed. I wrote that phrase on a grocery receipt so I would not turn them into a promise in my head. Then Helen asked Samuel the real question. Should I file this before the wedding? Samuel looked through the window toward the courthouse. After, he said. My niece gets married Saturday. I will not enter that church with a lawsuit in my pocket. I have waited nearly 3 decades. The courthouse can wait until Monday. Before the wedding, one person heard the truth from me, and it happened by accident. Aunt Evelyn called asking about flowers, and somewhere between lilies and seeding, my voice cracked. Out came Walter, the folder, Helen, and those words on the receipt. Evelyn went so quiet I checked the screen, thinking the call had failed. Then she told me she kept a cedar box at the end of her bed. Inside it were Christmas cards Samuel had sent every year since he left, one for every December, each signed first by Samuel and Angela, later by Samuel, Angela, and Sophie. She had kept them where Harold would never think to look. I spent too long being the sister who did not cause trouble, she said. I am tired down to the bone. Her voice changed. Bring your uncle. I will sit in the second pew. If anyone needs to stand, I will be first. I slid down my kitchen cabinets until I was sitting on the floor. For the first time, what I was preparing to do no longer felt like an explosion. It felt like a door other people had also been waiting to open. My father, meanwhile, worked the only room he believed he still owned. He called Pastor Morris twice. He called men from the church board, farmers he had known for decades, and told them his daughter was creating a spectacle, dragging old family matters into the Lord's house, humiliating her mother before the whole congregation. He did not mention race. Men like my father know which ugly words can be spoken at the kitchen table and which ones must be disguised in public. He used phrases like family business, respect, and after all we have done for her, which is nearly always followed by no actual accounting. Later I learned my father had also called Grant and told him to handle his sister, which is a sentence men enjoy saying when they have mistaken daughters for loose livestock. Grant apparently told him he had tried. I could almost hear my father hearing that word, tried, and hating it because it meant there were limits to the obedience he could collect. Pastor Morris called me Thursday night, sounding tired. Your father thinks I should speak with you about what kind of day this should be, he said. I asked one question. Pastor, did he explain whom he wants excluded from that church or the reason? There was a long pause. No, he said. Perhaps I should ask. My father expected the church to arrange itself around him as it always had. Instead, Pastor Morris told him only, we'll see. It is a dangerous sentence when spoken calmly to a man used to command. The night before the rehearsal dinner, Samuel came by the little rental house Marcus and I were using near the church. We sat on the back step while Marcus and Angela handled dishes inside. The white oak came into the conversation, as it always did with Samuel. He had planted it the spring before everything ended, a sapling no thicker than his wrist near the lane. Grant wanted it gone now for the new bin. According to the survey stakes, the tree sat on the disputed half. I said something sharp about Grant. Samuel lifted one hand to stop me. The land was never what brought me back, he said. I came back for my brother. I spent 10 years angry and the rest just missing him. I would trade every acre for one Sunday when Harold looked at Angela and saw family. He said Helen could handle the legal part, because law belonged to law and truth belonged to truth. But neither had been the reason he came. Sitting there in the dark, I finally saw that losing a fight is not the same as refusing to shrink into the role someone built for you. Samuel had been pushed out, but he had not allowed my father to define him. My mother's last attempt came in the church parking lot after rehearsal, when everyone else had left and the evening had turned blue over the gravel. She had clearly cried before coming to find me. I am begging you, she said. Do not take Samuel into that church in the morning. Your father cannot endure being humiliated that way. If you go through with this, the family breaks in one afternoon, and everyone will know you caused it. There it was, the family trick older than any wallpaper in that house. Take what a man has done and place it carefully in the lap of the nearest woman. I nearly told her I knew about Clara's will. I nearly said she had known and let him keep what was not his. But fear had opened her face so completely that I could glimpse the young woman she had once been, choosing the heated house instead of the cold truth. So I said only, "Mama, I am not tearing this family apart. I am opening the door. The damage happened in 1997. Everyone else just learned how to walk around the crack." She covered her mouth. "I can't lose everyone in one afternoon," she whispered. It was the truest thing she had said in years. It was still a request for me to continue losing so she would not have to. Walter Benson died shortly after 11 on the night before my wedding, with the window cracked so he could hear the fields. I was not assigned that night, but the nurse on duty knew what he had given me and called. I drove dark county roads to sit with him before they came. He seemed far smaller than he had when he pressed that folder into my hands. I held his chilled hand and thanked him for telling the truth after a lifetime of keeping other men's secrets in county files. Afterward, I returned to the rental house and sat in the unlit kitchen. Doubt came for me late, polite, and reasonable. It said I was preparing to enter my own wedding and blow everything apart because a dying man had handed me old papers. It showed me my mother's face. It showed me the entire county turning to stare. Marcus found me at 1:30 in the morning. He did not promise everything would be fine because he had never lied to me. He made tea and sat opposite me in the darkness. For almost an hour, I held my phone and almost called Samuel. I came close to asking him not to come. I nearly handed my father the quiet ceremony, the invisible uncle, and another polished lie. What stopped me was not rage. Rage would have been easier. It was a memory of being 5 and standing in the barn while Samuel lifted me high enough to see kittens curled in the loft. I had not felt like a burden in his arms. The family had erased him so completely that for years I wondered whether that warm uncle was half imagined. He was not imagined. He had been taken from the story, then hidden so the thieves would not have to look at the empty place. I did not make the call. At dawn, the sky turned gray over the fields. I drank the tea Marcus had made, went upstairs, and dressed for my wedding. My grandmother's hymnal sat on the dresser with a ribbon marking in the garden. I put on Clara's garnet earrings, the ones my mother had given me without mentioning they had once been Clara's favorite. Then I drove to Willow Creek Chapel. The church had stood through more than a century of Midwestern winters. That morning, it filled the way country churches fill for weddings and funerals, which is mostly the same people wearing different clothes. I waited in the small bride's room while Sophie fixed my veil with hands that shook no matter how hard she tried to steady them. Through the wall, I heard the organist warming up. She moved through old hymns, then landed on "In the Garden," the hymn tied to my grandmother. No one had been asked to play it. Sophie went still. Our eyes met in the mirror. Neither of us spoke. Some things feel too fragile to name. Out in the sanctuary, my father arrived early, dressed in his gray suit. He moved through the pews shaking hands, accepting the tender looks people offer the bride's father, performing dignity like a man who had rehearsed in the mirror. He believed there were only a pair of possible endings. Either I would lose courage and let him take my arm, or I would walk the aisle alone while the county watched me be punished. Those were the endings he understood because those were the only ones he had ever left for me. The coordinator put her head into the room. "1 minute," she said. "I need to know whether your father is walking you or if you're going by yourself." "Neither," I said. Her face flickered with confusion and then the music rose. The ushers moved into position at the heavy double doors behind the sanctuary. The doors opened. Light came first, bright behind us, so for 1 second the church saw only a shape. Then people realized the shape was not one person. Samuel came to my side wearing an old charcoal suit, older than Sophie and pressed with care that morning. He bent his arm. I slid my hand through it. For one breath, We stood in the open doorway while an entire church turned to see who had come to give Natalie Whittaker away. Recognition moved through the room like wind across wheat. The oldest faces changed first. Someone 3 rows back lifted a hand to her mouth. A program slipped from a lap and skated across the floor. Under his breath, so quietly it landed more as feeling than sound, Samuel began humming the hymn the organist played, Clara's hymn, the song his mother had hummed in a kitchen he had been barred from for almost 3 decades. We took the first step. Near the front, an old man's voice broke the quiet. "Is that Samuel Whittaker?" My father shot up from his pew as if the floor had rejected him. He jabbed a finger down the aisle toward his brother. "He is not our kind," he said, loud enough for the rafters. "He has no place here. He has not set foot in this county in 29 years. He does not belong in this church, and he does not belong on her arm." There it was. The phrase that had run under my family like buried wire. The same words he had used against Angela in 1997. The same words he had used against Marcus at our dinner table. Now he had said them openly, loud enough for every person whose respect he had spent years protecting. I did not meet his volume. I had learned that if you shout back, people stop listening to truth and start watching a contest. I let his words hang in the air until they began to shrink. Then Aunt Evelyn stood in the second pew exactly as promised, so quickly the woman beside her startled. Pastor Morris's wife stood next. Then Thomas Cooper, an old farmer who had known both Whittaker boys when they were teenagers. Then one row, then another. People stood not as a mob, but as witnesses, until my father alone remained upright for the wrong cause while the rest of the church stood for something right. I looked down the long aisle at him. "You told me to walk alone," I said, keeping my voice low. "I thought about it. I decided not to." Pastor Morris had married and buried half the county. He read the room in seconds. He did not scold. He did not order my father out. He raised both hands the way he did over baptisms. "Friends," he said steadily, "we came here to watch a marriage begin. Shall we continue?" The room gave back a low yes, softer than a shout and stronger than one. People sat. Samuel brought me the remaining distance while the organist carried my grandmother's hymn all the way forward. He placed my hand in Marcus's. He never glared at my father. He squeezed Marcus's shoulder once, then took his place in the front pew with Angela, Sophie, and Evelyn. One section over, my mother sat frozen between her furious husband and her daughter at the altar. That is the country a person lives in after decades of choosing silence. Marcus took both my hands. Our vows were simple. Just before we spoke them, he leaned close and whispered the smallest true thing of the day. "Your grandmother would have loved this music." For a few minutes, the wedding was simply a wedding. Marcus said his vows in a voice that only trembled once. I said mine without looking toward my father. When Pastor Morris pronounced us married, the room clapped in a way that felt less like politeness and more like release. Marcus kissed me, and for the first time that morning I remembered to breathe. The reception was in the church hall. Sheet cake, coffee urns, folding tables, and plastic forks that bent if you threatened them with frosting. My father did not have the grace to leave. He found Samuel near the coffee, surrounded by older men who remembered more than Harold wanted them to. "You came back for the land," my father said. 29 years gone, and now you show up when a wedding gives you an opening to grab the home place. That is what this is." The hall quieted. At last, he had reached the real question. The manila folder sat inside my bag. I had brought it with me without fully admitting the reason. I took it out and placed it on the table between them. I did not wave it. I did not read from it like some courtroom actress with a flair for daytime television. I set down Clara's will, the quitclaim deed, Walter's note, and Helen Brooks's careful summary. Then I left my hand resting on the folder for one moment, letting it be what it was, a fact. Samuel looked at the papers, then at his brother. "I never came for the land, Harold," he said. "I came for her." He nodded toward me. "And for every child in this family who ever got told they were outside the circle." Across the room, Grant went pale. He understood what the others did not yet, that an unadministered will and a challenged title could put his expansion loan on ice before a court decided anything. He set his coffee down very slowly, with the carefulness of someone trying to hide shaking hands. Thomas Cooper looked at the papers and then at my father. "Harold," he said, flat and final, "is that Clara's will?" My father said nothing. He looked at the folder like a dead thing had climbed out of the ground and sat at the table. For once in my life, Harold Whittaker found himself surrounded by people who had known him for decades, and for once no prepared line came to him. His mouth opened once, then closed. I did not feel victory. I felt the strange quiet of watching a giant from childhood shrink into a scared man standing next to a coffee urn. Helen Brooks filed Monday morning to reopen Clara Whittaker's estate and challenge the 1997 transfer. It was not finished, because real life has the bad manners not to tie itself into a neat bow. Helen still used careful words, likely contestable, not guaranteed. But a title becomes clouded the day it is challenged. Within weeks, after the title company noticed the filing, the bank froze the unused part of Grant's expansion loan until ownership of the ground could be sorted out. The new grain bin could not go where he planned. The white oak stayed. The county did not change all at once. Places like Bellard County do not do anything all at once unless a tornado is involved. But something shifted. At the feed store, men who had once laughed too loudly at my father's jokes suddenly remembered they needed to check something on another aisle. At church, people stopped asking my mother how Harold was holding up and started asking whether she was all right. That frightened her more than blame would have. Kindness can be terrifying when you have organized your life around surviving without it. My father had kept control for nearly 3 decades by making sure nobody put the correct question in the correct room. He could not withstand one afternoon once the question was laid on a church hall table. Several weeks after the wedding, we met at Samuel and Angela's house. Samuel, Angela, Sophie, Evelyn, Marcus, and me. Evelyn carried out the cedar chest with Samuel's old Christmas cards, and on the porch we read a few aloud, laughing at old photographs and crying when the laughter ran out. Down near Samuel's lane stood another white oak, planted the first spring he owned land of his own. When we went inside for supper, Samuel held the screen door open for every person. It had the same kind of spring as the door at the farm, but he did not let it snap behind anyone. He waited until the last of us crossed the threshold. "In my home," he said, "nobody gets shut out halfway through the doorway." And then he closed it gently,